Have you ever stopped and wondered why the real experts inside big companies, the people who can literally see a disaster on the horizon, just get ignored? Well, today we're going to dig into a really fascinating report that unpacks exactly that. Why security professionals, despite all their skill, so often have their warnings get lost in translation, and sometimes with absolutely catastrophic results.
And look, this isn't some abstract, theoretical problem. This quote right here, it comes from an internal investigation by the energy giant Statoil, now called Equinor, right after a devastating terrorist attack. That is just a stunning admission of a massive internal failure, a failure of influence that ended up costing dozens of lives.
The stakes here really couldn't have been higher. Back on January 16, 2013, terrorists stormed a massive gas plant in Algeria. It turned into a brutal 3-day hostage crisis. When it was all over, 40 workers were dead. And the financial hit? We're talking over $12 billion, not to mention the reputational damage, which is just impossible to measure.
But the most shocking part of this whole tragedy isn't just what happened, but what didn't happen before it all went down. Because as the investigation later revealed, this entire disaster might have been preventable. It turns out the on-site security team had been asking for security upgrades over and over again. They warned executives that the threat was getting worse, but their risk ratings were actually overwritten and their messages were just ignored. And that is the central puzzle here. Why on earth didn't the decision makers listen? So how does a warning this critical just fall on deaf ears? To figure that out, we're going to turn to a new research report from the ASIS Foundation. It digs right into this exact problem, and what it found was a systemic disconnect that it calls the influence gap. The research points to 3 huge barriers that stop experts from being heard. First, there's a structural barrier that keeps them isolated. Then, a perception barrier that hurts their credibility. And finally, a communication barrier that basically scrambles their message. Let's break down each one. Okay, first up, the silo problem. So the research says there are 2 streams of influence in any company. In stream 1, you've got your technical specialists, your security pros, for example. They have incredibly deep expertise, but they operate in their own little silo. Then you have stream 2, which is your general managers who work across all the different departments. They have a way broader focus and, this is key, a much wider sphere of influence. And security, for all its importance, is often just stuck over there in stream 1.
And this silo thing gets even worse when you look at how companies think about risk. See, security is usually filed under operational risk, short-term technical problems. But the executives, they live and breathe in the world of strategic risk, the big, long-term stuff that's tied to the company's actual survival. So when security comes in talking about a specific threat, it often doesn't even show up on the strategic radar of the people who actually control the budget.
The second barrier is all about perception. Let's be honest, for a lot of people, the word security still brings up images of guards, gates, and guns. It's seen as a cost, not something that helps the business grow. And the report found that because a lot of security pros come from military or law enforcement, there's this perception, fair or not, that they don't have the same formal business education as their peers. And that really hurts their credibility in the boardroom. This quote from a security professional in the study, it just says everything, doesn't it? There's this huge gap between how these experts see their own strategic value and how the rest of the company sees them. And that brings us right to our third barrier, communication. The problem is, there are so many different risk management models out there that it's created what the report calls a white noise of confusing language. Is it a risk, a threat, a vulnerability, a control, a countermeasure? The message just gets completely diluted before it even has a chance to land. So, at the end of the day, here's what it boils down to. Security and the C-suite are speaking 2 totally different languages. The security team is talking about threats and vulnerabilities and likelihoods. Meanwhile, the board wants to talk about financial metrics, business value, and strategic impact. It's a complete and total disconnect. Okay, so that's the diagnosis of the problem, right? It's a bit grim. But the good news is the report doesn't just leave us there. It actually offers a really clear, actionable way to start bridging this divide. The researchers lay out 4 key strategies. First, stop trying to invent your own system and align with the company's existing risk framework. Second, and this is a big one, completely separate your risk messaging into 2 parts. Third, you've got to proactively learn the language of business. And fourth, build up that professional status through formal education. Let's dive into that second step, because it's a real game changer. Instead of one big, scary report, the idea is to have 2 separate conversations. The first conversation is all about a business impact analysis.
Your only goal here is to tell the story of the problem in the language of the business. Forget threats for a second. Talk about the potential financial loss, the operational downtime, the hit to the company's brand.
Now, only after the leaders agree on how big the problem is do you have the second conversation. And this one is all about the solution, using a cost-benefit analysis. You see, you're not asking for money for security anymore. You're presenting an investment decision, laying out different options and comparing their costs against the value of the risk they're taking off the table. This completely reframes the entire discussion.
All right, let's zoom out for a second for the final big takeaway. Because even though this report was all about security professionals, the lessons here are so much bigger. They really get at something we could call the expert's dilemma.
What we've really been talking about this whole time is this expert's dilemma. It's the same challenge that any specialist faces, whether you're a lawyer, an engineer, a data scientist, whatever, when you have to convince generalist leaders to act on your complex insights. The rules for bridging that gap are pretty much universal.
And this quote from the report just nails it, doesn't it? It puts the responsibility for translation squarely on the expert's shoulders, and that is such a powerful shift in how you think about it. It's not the board's job to learn your language. It's your job to learn theirs.
So I'll just leave you with this to chew on. In your own organization, in your world, who are the experts with critical knowledge who just aren't being heard? And what would it really take to finally bridge that influence gap?